Thank you so much, everyone. It is absolutely wonderful to meet you all here and to be here today. It is truly an honor to meet you who are working so hard to make the Nordic model come true in Germany. Greetings from my government to you. A government that is a feminist government. And I spoke to someone at the coffee just a few minutes ago, and she said she met the Swedish ambassador to Germany, Per Torresson, who is a fantastic person, and he presented himself as a feminist. I do too. I am a feminist. I truly believe in equal rights for everyone and for gender equality. And I want you to know that the Swedish government is following your work, the work you guys are doing in this room, very, very closely. And it's not only the Swedish government who is following what you are doing. I would say that everyone globally, either you are against prostitution or you are arguing that prostitution should be considered a job, they are all following what you are doing right now. What you are working for, a Germany free from buying, where buying sex is no longer legal, and where women who are being prostituted are recognized as persons who should be offered help instead of just stay in this awful business. And it is so important, not only to those who are being prostituted at your legal brothels. It's important to your society. It's important for gender equality. So what you are doing, your efforts, are of direct importance for millions and millions of women all over the world, the work you are doing. And it is truly important for young generations all over the world. And you know why? Because abroad, internationally, there's a great admiration for your country, for Germany. Wirtschaftswunder, the German wonder. A strong economic superpower, well-developed society, that's what a lot of people say about Germany. And I've been in this office, I've been in this office since May 16. And I have, in this capacity, conducted talks with more than 40 governments all over the world. And talks about how to best combat human trafficking for sexual exploitation and the nexus between human trafficking and prostitution. And I can assure you that I have had so many discussions where the person I discussed with have referred to Germany and to your legislation regarding prostitution. They can just not believe that Germany would allow prostitution if it is as bad as I say it is, and you know it is. They can just not believe it. Not even when I give them the facts of the consequences of the Swedish policy decision to prohibit purchase of sex and the consequences of the decision in Germany to legalize brothels and so on. Sometimes I manage to change their mind as we sit and speak. But then when they go out in their parliament, they go out and talk to their peers and so on, there are so many people who still are in their mind, referring to Germany. No, it's so many women who actually choose to be in prostitution. They think this is a good profession. So it's sometimes very hard to have this discussion because they are so focused on that Germany allows this, right? So friends, what you are doing are important to millions of people. A decision in Germany to prohibit brothels, pimping, and the purchase of sex, and to recognize women in prostitution as victims of violence would have an enormous impact globally. I am 100% sure that many, many countries would follow, especially in Europe, if Germany changed. And yeah. There are so many positive signs also already that there is a growing awareness regarding the facts of prostitution, that it's bad both for individuals and for the whole society. And several of you have probably heard me saying this before, but I'm going to say it again. When I started 4.5 years ago, full of energy, a little naive, my first trip was to Vienna. It was a big conference on human trafficking. I think it was Austria who's chair. Germany was either the previous chair or the next chair. Well, it was Austria, Germany, and the Netherlands at least up on the table. So I went up like this, and 30 minutes I gave them my best arguments, and I was like this, and I, felt very energized, and it was silent. And afterwards it was coffee, and I went to one of the tables. No one came to my table. No one wanted to talk to me, and for several years this was very common on the international arena, on high level meetings, that this topic is so sensitive, so we can just not address it. But I've been doing that like a fool every time I had a chance, and I would say that the big change came last year. In September or October, I was invited to this high-level meeting in London, also a high-level meeting on human trafficking, and I was invited as the key speaker. And in the room you had Germany, the Netherlands, Austria, United States, New Zealand, Australia, and some other countries. And I took the floor and I said, I've been doing this now for almost 4 years. I'm getting sick and tired of going to meetings like this to talk about best practice to combat human trafficking for sexual exploitation without being able to talk about the elephant in the room. The fact that legal prostitution, that's where those who are trafficked for sexual exploitation are being exploited, and we will never be successful combating human trafficking as long as we have legal prostitution. "30 minutes, boom, 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 boom," and I was not being nice, and I thought to myself when I was done, okay, that was the end of my very short career as an ambassador, but that's fine, that's fine. So the first person to raise his hand was this man from Germany. He introduced himself as the head of one of the division at one of your ministries for organized crime. And he said, well, I represent the country who has this different view, or at least we have a different legislation. But I'm the first one to agree with you that our legislation has not succeeded to protect the women in prostitution. On the contrary, the system we have is a total fail. And we are now changing the law. We're adding some requirements to try to fix the law. But my personal view, he said, in front of all the other countries, is that we need to change the law to the Nordic model. And I am certain that we will within a few years. And when he said this the skin on my arm. The next one to raise her hand was a lady from the Netherlands. And she presented herself as a senior advisor from the Ministry of Justice. And she said the exact same word as the man from Germany And this was in front of all the other countries. And the next one to take the floor was the Commission, the office of Mirja Vassiliadou, the EU coordinator for human trafficking. It was not Mirja, it was a younger lady. And she gave 100% support to what I've said. So I would say that was a major breakthrough in those high-level rooms, so-called. Yes. And the next proof that things are changing was a visit I did to Amsterdam last year. I was invited to the red light district to give a speech, and I did. Kind of the same, boom, boom, boom. And it was a room filled with people like this, and I was the only speaker. But when I was done, this man raised his hand and he said, I'm not supposed to say anything, but I feel the need to. I am the national rapporteur for the Netherlands to EU on human trafficking, and I'm also a prosecutor. And he stood up and he said exactly the same words. It's obvious our legislation has failed to protect the women. We had a good thought that we would regulate this and those who chose to be in prostitution, but it is obvious that most of those who are working here in the red light district in Amsterdam, they are being exploited. They have been trafficked here, or they have been lured into this, or for some reason they see no other options than to stay in this. But they are not here voluntarily. And we are building a case against our own government now with prosecuting many traffickers in this area. So that was also wonderful. Then the next big sign, at least for me, because I've been really having these arguments with different UN organizations.
In which year?
This was last year that I spoke about.
When you spoke the first time. When you spoke the first time, which
That was 2016 when I was in Vienna. Yeah, and this in Amsterdam was last year, and also London was last year. And now, like I said, I've been talking to UN organizations a lot, trying to convince them not to use the word sex workers and all that. And it's been very hard, USAID and other organizations are pushing for sex workers' rights. But just recently, Pumsile, who's the executive director of UN Women, finally came out public saying that prostitution is exploitation of women. Prostitution is not a job. And those who are in prostitution should be supported by governments to leave prostitution, period. And that was a big step for a UN organization to do that statement. So that's another very, very strong evidence that things are changing, I would say. Then I know that the Office for Human Trafficking at the OSCE in Vienna, you know that office? OSCE has 57 member states, and the head of the office name is, God, I lost it this second, but he used to be a prosecutor in the United States up in Seattle, Washington, and he implemented the Nordic model up in Seattle, Washington, with very good results. And he has the same view now, of course, when he's head of this division at OSCE to combat human trafficking in Vienna. But of course, 57 countries, politics, you have to kind of be careful how you balance this. But his view is very clear. We will never be successful combating human trafficking for sexual exploitation as long as governments keep it legal in some countries. Yes. Of course, there are setbacks. We really need to try to address Amnesty International and other human rights organizations who are having a different view on this. And it's so hard for me to understand that they can have this. There was an article in a Swedish newspaper. Am I talking too fast? No. It was an article in a Swedish news. Sorry? Oh, louder. There was an article in a Swedish newspaper last fall, an interview with Human Rights Watch in Sweden, that's a human rights organization, saying that we are now recommending the South African government to legalize purchase of sex and selling sex. And I worked a lot against South Africa, so I was very upset when I read this article. So I called the head of Human Rights Organization, the Human Rights Watch in Sweden, and I said, hey, can we meet? Because I do not understand how your decision and how you argue. And he said, yes, of course. Actually, the woman who did this study in South Africa, where she interviewed 70 women in prostitution, and they came to the conclusion that they should make this legal, she will be in Stockholm on Monday. So we can meet you both. So they came to my office. We spoke for 1 hour. I gave them all my arguments why prostitution should not be legal, that it's bad for gender equality. Most of those who are in prostitution will get hurt physically and psychologically. It is a gold well for organized crime, and so on and so on and so on. And they agreed on everything I said. Everything. They did not have one argument against me. So at the end, my jaw was hanging down here, and I was like, okay, so how can you recommend this? And this lady said, only one reason. We do not want to make a recommendation to a country that would mean that these poor women in these poor countries would not have a way of making a living. And for me, having a human rights organization argue like that is really, 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 really bad. A human rights organization should argue for the right to decent work and so on, not legitimize countries to not take care of the most vulnerable citizens, right? So I was really upset, and it's probably violence of etiquette to always mention Human Rights Watch Sweden, but I want to shame them because I think this is so bad when they argue like this. Yes. Another good sign, I would say, is the agreement between France and Sweden to have a joint diplomacy against human trafficking for sexual exploitation and against prostitution. This was an agreement our two countries made on the 8th of March last year. You know what day that is, of course. And this year, on the 30th of July, we produced some sort of action plan that should concretize exactly what we're going to do, our two countries together. And what we're going to do is, of course, do advocacy against other countries, primarily in Europe, to try to convince them that if we're going to reach the goals of Agenda 2030, we need to address the issue of prostitution. Prostitution cannot be accepted as a job. If we're going to be successful combating human trafficking, we cannot allow prostitution, and so on. So that's the bilateral advocacy against other countries. Of course, this is a decision for every country to make, but we will do our best to argue in every meeting we can. And these are instructions that goes to our embassies all over the world to arrange meetings, roundtable discussions with the governments, to invite grassroots organizations in the countries, to give them a platform to talk about these questions. We are also going to do a lot of work in the UN to try to make sure that UN stay clean on the language and so on, and in other international organizations too. So I'm very excited about this collaboration between our two countries, and of course we hope that other countries will join us in this cooperation. And like I said, if Germany changed the law and we could do advocacy together with Germany, Wow. Yes. Then I'm sure that we will make the 2014 European Parliament resolution come true. A Europe where prostitution is not legal. Let's see here. Just to mention a few other things, Swedish government this year is giving financial support to Coalition Against Prostitution. Some of you probably know that that umbrella organization. They will use that money to kind of strengthen their member organizations. We're also giving money to Donor Direct in New York, to the Gloria Steinem Equality Fund, who also is using that money to push that out to grassroots organizations who are working for our agenda. We're also giving quite a large amount of money to the UN Fund for Victims of Human Trafficking, which are projects that about 90% are targeting women who are victims of trafficking for sexual exploitation. And to say a few words, what other things are going on in Sweden? Well, there is a governmental inquiry right now looking into the possibility to take away fines from, if you buy sex today in Sweden, you will get a fine. But there is a political commitment, a majority in the parliament and in the Swedish government, who wants to take away the fines and only have jail. If you buy sex, yeah. And I think this is logical. We have a new legislation in Sweden that really is focusing on consent when you're having sex. And if you don't consent, then it's rape, right? And it's very easy to argue the same way. Paying someone to let you use her or his body, that's not the real consent we're talking about. So I'm very excited about this possibility, which I think will come true. And I want to mention this court case we had just recently also. There was this man who bought sex from a woman in Sweden. And then he went online to one of these sites that we heard about earlier today, where he wrote, "Oh, the first time I went to her, she was great, but this second time I went to her, she was bad, and I'm sure she's been trafficked to do this because she kind of didn't like it." So when the court found out that he posted this, the prosecutor took him for rape because he knew she was doing this voluntarily. So he was convicted for rape. Yeah. Also, the issue of making it possible to prosecute Swedish citizens who go to Thailand or other countries where it's legal to buy sex is also an issue for this governmental inquiry now. The government tried to put it to Parliament a few years ago, but it was voted, or it never reached Parliament because of political bam. But this time I think there is a possibility that this law will come through. And of course it's hard for Swedish police to catch the perpetrators in other countries. But it will send the signal that no, this is not okay in Sweden. It's not okay when you go abroad either. And I think that's the big thing with a legislation like that. Then Swedish corporations who have a lot of people working abroad, like IKEA, Volvo, and other those corporations, they must have in their statutes that if you work for this company, you cannot buy sex. And they should, yes. And we will do everything to push these organizations to put that in their policies also for employees that are, citizens of the country that the Swedish organization is working in. So, for example, if IKEA has this in a shop in Thailand, everyone of the Thai people who are working should also be included in this policy. Then we will have a real impact. If you work for my company, this is not acceptable, right? So that would be a great company. You know that there was the Swedish women's lobby or the Swedish women organizations who really pushed the government in front of themselves to make the Swedish legislation come true. It was the job you are doing that made this come true in Sweden. Now they're pushing the Swedish government in front of them, really pushing the Swedish government in front of them in the pornography issue. Yes. And this is so important. I wrote an article 2 years ago that was posted in our biggest newspaper saying that when I first started this job, I was ignorant. I did not make the connection between prostitution and pornography, but I see it clear today. It's the same kind of exploitation of young people. It adds to demand and so on and so on. And this is something we really, really need to address. And if you look at pornography today, if you go into Pornhub, the mainstream in Pornhub, I mean, that's pure violence against women, right? And that's what our young people are. That's what our young people, 11-year-old boys and girls are looking at. And I think it was mentioned earlier that we're starting to see results from this, of change in attitude towards women, also in Sweden, you know. And also a lot of my wife, she's a psychotherapist, and she has quite a few young men in therapy, and quite a few of them come to her because they have issues with their impotence and watching too much porn. No, it's true. Young guys, yeah. And as soon as every time I have some time over, I try to travel to schools in Sweden to have this talk. First I talk about human trafficking in general, then I talk about human trafficking for sexual exploitation, and then I talk about pornography. And I can assure you that it's a great interest for all the topics, but when I come to pornography, it is so quiet in the room, and you can see the ears like this, and especially on the guys. There's such a, and I've received many letters about this, they are really hoping for the adult generation to talk about this with them. I got this letter from this young guy, and he said, like, you know, me and my friends were watching porn like 4 or 5 hours every day, but we don't talk about it to each other. We don't talk about it to our parents. Our parents doesn't talk about it to us. Our teachers doesn't talk about it. The politicians are not talking about it. It's existing everywhere, but no one is talking about it. And they really say, please address this issue. So now what the Swedish lobby is women's lobby is pushing for is for a governmental inquiry that will look into the harms of prostitution for both individuals and society as a big. And also there's a strong push, of course, and this might surprise you, there are many municipalities in Sweden where there's not even a porn filter on the computers in school or in libraries, so young people can access this porn very easily. So we're going to address this issue, I can be sure. Also, the issue of prostitution, once again, I mean, we had this legislation for more than 20 years. This is a discussion we need to keep having in society. You cannot, it's like democracy. You cannot take it for granted. There's a push from Hollywood, from culture, Pretty Woman kind of discussions like that, sugar daddies and all that. So we need to keep this public discussion going, and we have a governmental authority, the Gender Equality Agency in Sweden. They are commissioned to keep this discussion alive in the Swedish society. And actually we were really helped because maybe some of you saw that. A few months ago, a very high-profile person in Sweden. He used to be a boxer, and he has lots of restaurants and well-known from the media and from TV and so on. He was caught buying sex. And the public outcry was not of this world. I mean, everyone stood up saying, this is not acceptable, this is the worst. The price for him was very, very high, for good reasons. But he lost all his contracts, he lost his businesses, everything. It's just not acceptable in the Swedish society. So usually when I get the chance to go on stage like this, I will use my 30 minutes or so to really speak about the Nordic model. But I know that you probably are more experts on the Nordic model than I am. So I did not want to kind of use my time for something that you already know. But if there are any questions, I hope that you will ask them, because for these last 4.5 years, I think I've heard most questions, and I think I have answered for most questions. Please. Thank you very much.